And so it's not uncommon to see that there's this dynamic nature to the client's capacity for risk. They have done a good job saving around $900,000, but I mean, frankly, they have a pretty healthy lifestyle too. So while there's some safety margin in their plan, it's not like there was a ton of it. So we had to be pretty darn precise and really had to execute well in terms of their financial planning.
Welcome to Retire Smarter with Kevin Kroski. Find answers to your toughest questions and get educated about the financial world. It's time to retire smarter.
It's another edition of Retire Smarter coming your way. Walter Storholt alongside Kevin Kroski, President and Wealth Advisor at True Wealth Design, serving you throughout Northeast Ohio with offices in Akron and Canfield. You can find us online by going to truewealthdesign.com to listen to past episodes and learn more about Kevin and the team. And I'm excited for today, Kevin, because we're doing a little bit of it's like show and tell. Back when we were kids in school, we've done a lot of telling on the show recently, covering a lot of details about the coronavirus and about proper planning techniques and some of the changes and adjustments that you guys have been looking at. And we're going to have the show part on today's show and get some great examples and some case studies of folks that you've worked with and kind of an inside look at some of the actual moves that you guys are doing to help people through this time and to put together proper plans. So this is kind of a fun episode. I always love the storytelling element of when we get together.
Yeah, whenever you're going through and whenever somebody works with us or any advisor, any professional service provider for that matter, or even a physician, you can't, we work with a lot of smart clients, but this isn't what they do. And even though many have the aptitude to be able to learn how to do it, I can't teach all the things that we need to do and know and perform for clients to somebody that I've learned over 15 years of doing this. I've probably worked the equivalent of 30 years, just given how much I've worked. But you can't just simply teach everybody that.
You can't teach experience.
You can't, and not only experience, but wisdom too, and know when something really matters or how to interpret something in light of new information. It's like when I go to the dentist several years ago, I had a tear in my rotator cuff from playing volleyball, and one orthopedic surgeon that I respected told me that I had to have surgery to repair it. I got a second opinion, and he said, you really don't. He said, you're going to be fine. You can't be doing this overhand sports stuff anymore. Go play golf or something. But you're going to be fine. You're probably going to have it at some point, but now's not the time. And so I had two people that I respected that no matter how much I went online or how much I spoke to them, I wasn't going to be able to really comprehend what they know and what they do from all their years of formal education, from residency, from fellowships to experience, actually performing the surgeries and seeing the results of it afterwards. And so ultimately, frankly, it comes down to trust and kind of evaluating the situation too. I mean, the worst case in there was, I don't have the surgery now. And then, the second guy was wrong and I do have to have it. 12, 14 years later, it's been fine. So I had similar experience with getting wisdom teeth pulled out. I had, 3 different dentists that I personally know tell me 3 different things what I needed to do with my wisdom teeth. And I'm like, wow, this isn't good. So believe me, I get it when somebody's kind of tuning in to this or coming into our office, and some of the things that we may be saying may sound good. But there's a lot of trust that anybody puts into a professional service person that they work with. And we've talked about this in the past, but people, these people that are providing advice, that are providing hopefully leadership during times like this, need to be competent and need to be trustworthy. And either of those two things aren't present, frankly, the client can get hurt. So I think through having the podcast and certainly I've been writing for more than a decade now, but I think it makes it certainly more transparent and clearer as far as, hey, what is our competency? What is it that we do? And the trustworthiness is something that's built over time. Certainly you kind of get it on an implied basis when you get a referral from a client to a friend or a family member, or from an attorney or accountant that we work with, that we've been working with for a long time, but somebody gets introduced to us. Certainly people get to probably know me a bit from listening to the podcast over all these episodes that we've been doing. But this is really, the time where we have to roll up our sleeves, not only do the work, but we really have to execute, and we really have to show some leadership. and it's been happening at breakneck speed. It's retirement planning. It's an ing word. My wife was an English teacher, and she's got her graduate degree in composition. And I asked her before the episode recording here, I said, that's a present participle, right, hon? And she's like, yes, good job, honey. And so maybe I got a brownie point with my wife, or maybe she just thought I should have known that and should have asked the question in the first place. I'm not sure.
It's always better than a dangling participle.
Yeah, don't ask me what that is. But it's an ongoing thing. It's a continuous form of a verb, and things have been happening quite quickly. So, going back through the 40 or 50 episodes that we've done now, we've been picking up a lot of new listeners, and you may be just coming in, at this episode, or maybe you've listened to some others. But frankly, if you go back episodes 3 through 10, we did a whole series on what we call retirement rules gone awry, or just a lot of rules of thumb on retirement planning. Either aren't accurate, aren't likely to apply, or are really designed for, frankly, for people that probably aren't tuning into this podcast. It is something that's customizable, the whole retirement planning process, as well as the outcomes from it. And what actually was born out of that is really what we take clients through today, something called our Retire Smarter solution. And we actually have a podcast coming up on that soon, but it's basically our retirement planning process kind of packaged together to make it really clear and show clients, here's what all the things that we have to do to make sure that we're going to help you retire smarter. So if you haven't, listened to those episodes, or even if you have, it's probably not a bad time to go back and listen to some of those about the dynamic nature of things that we find ourselves in, and really what are some of the things that maybe need to be relooked at in your retirement plan right now. The investment markets have been changing wildly on a daily and weekly basis. We went through an investing process series in episodes 27 through 30 that really just talked about our process. We had a call with a prospective client earlier this week that was interviewing us and a couple other firms, and one of his questions was, hey, what are you guys doing differently now that we're in this? And I said, the process is the same. It's just the speed with which you need to execute it in light of the new information and the new inputs that are being fed into it is just happening quite quickly. So the plan needs to be updated. We need to look at that. The investments are continually being monitored, and new inputs feeding into there. Certainly there's some other things that we may need to do from just a prudent management standpoint of rebalancing or tax loss harvesting, but things are just changing very quickly. And then we did a retirement income planning series where we kind of looked at two broad camps of, having more of a probability-based approach using investments versus, more of a guaranteed-based approach using insurance products. And as any longtime listener to the show knows, that it's not like I completely disdain the insurance-based approach. We all, have Social Security or a pension that has some guaranteed-based elements to it. I'm generally not a big fan for buying more of it through like a fixed or indexed annuity or variable annuity or something like that. And what we made the case for was having more of a dynamic approach to having this probability-based, investing-based approach to generating your retirement income. And those dynamic things are, hey, what are market expectations? And then what does your investment allocation need to look like in light of those expectations, as well as in light of what your financial plan looks like? Because we're matching those investments back to, your financial plan and make sure that we can meet your cash flows and maintain your lifestyle. And then, if we need to have a dynamic nature to our spending, if things do go awry, if we are, if this coronavirus thing continues to protract longer and longer, we may need to go ahead and cut back spending a little bit for certain clients. But we need to have a preordained plan to go ahead and think through that and then execute during times of stress. So those are things that I think anybody, I've encouraged even the other advisors in our office to just go back and re-listen to that. I think it's helpful just to kind of get that check as far as, hey, we talked about all this stuff, we just need to execute it now. And when I was preparing for today, frankly, I had a smile on my face when I was signing on, Walter, and it wasn't just because I was, getting ready to talk with you, buddy.
Talk to me.
Yes, I mean, it was certainly part of that reason. But I went back and looked at a client that we've been working with since 2011, and Of course, as I always do when I'm on the podcast and talking about a client situation, you got to change up a few things, but we'll use kind of the prototypical John and Jane here. And John and Jane are 69 and 68 respectively, currently. So in 2020, as we sit here today in early April, they've been clients since 2011. John was working and retired in 2014. Jane was taking care of the household for many more years and retired before him. I would, conservative or aggressive, those are all kind of qualitative words that I prefer more of a mathematical definition, but they would describe themselves as more conservative investors. They've never had a really high allocation to stocks. We started working with them. We had about a 50% stock portfolio for them. So, we became clients in 2011, conveyed to us that, hey, we're conservative. So again, we kind of had a more balanced approach for them, which was more importantly, in my view, consistent with their financial plan, both in terms of how much risk they could afford to take, as well as in terms of meeting the required return that they really needed to make their plan work. So he got ready, retired in 2014. Back then in 2014, it was pretty well, at that point we were out from 2008, 2009. When he first became a client in 2011, there was still a lot of concern about a double dip recession. That was the year that the Greek debt crisis happened, that the U.S. defaulted technically on the debt ceiling and on their debt. Returns weren't great in 2011 in the stock market. There was still a lot of concern, and then there was a lot of money sloshing around, and so there was people still concerned at that point in time as well about inflation and rising interest rates. And so there's a lot of concern kind of coming into it, but as we work through their planning process with them, we really, frankly, we kind of arm wrestled them a little bit on delaying Social Security. That is something that they have done, and John's getting ready to start Social Security here at his maximum benefit later this year at age 70. It's going to kick in at about $42,000 a year for him. He did, although this is not an option any longer, taken away a few years ago because probably it's a little bit too good to be true, but we did avail ourselves of this planning strategy for many, many years, and for John and Jane included, where we had Jane file for her benefits, and then John did a restricted application just to take a spousal benefit on Jane's benefit, meanwhile deferring his own to age 70. And so we've been doing that now for several years, but they retired in 2014. Jane had a fairly, relatively speaking, in terms of what they spend per year, a relatively small Social Security benefit. And then again, when John started his, he got half of that. So they've been taking a lot of money out from their portfolio now for 6 years or so. And when they started working with us, when they started in 2014, at the beginning of 2014, again, the year that John retired, their portfolio was around $900,000. And so, they started, taking money out, had to get used to pulling money out and having their portfolio, their savings, go ahead and recreate their paycheck. At this point, Social Security hadn't started at all for them. And so it was doing 100% of the work. So, when you think about in terms of income planning, anything from Social Security or anything from, if you are still working in any way, your earned income is going to be used first and foremost. But then as you kind of, look at and see, here's what we want to spend, here's what we can afford to spend. Social Security is not really providing that much or anything right now, given the age that we retired. So our portfolio has to do all the work. So when John retired in 2014, and stock valuations by many metrics had gotten more expensive, U.S. market particularly had done quite well. 2013, it was up more than, 30, nearly 40% in some parts of the market. And we said, hey, your portfolio's got to do a lot of work here over the next few years until you go ahead and claim Social Security. We've had good returns in the stock market. Why don't we go ahead and reduce the stock allocation a little bit? So they were around 50% when we first started working together in stocks. And then when the portfolio really started doing some of that work, and after the market had become much more expensive in 2013, we reduced the target down to 40%. So 40% in stocks, 60% in bonds, and basically, when you think of that 60% in bonds, if all they did was kind of spend down bonds first, it could have bridged the gap until when John was going to start Social Security at age 70. So I think that's really important. A lot of times when you go through a financial planning process, a lot of the tools we use, you'll hear something called like a Monte Carlo simulation, and ours looks like a speedometer. And basically, simply put, you want to be in the green zone. You don't want to be in the red zone, but you want to be in the green zone or better. And that's good. And mathematically, it's a great way to go ahead and model uncertainty in the future and give a client advice as to, hey, is that lifestyle, is that spending rate sustainable? And but it's still a little complicated. I like to break it down even further and just kind of use that sort of bond bridge analogy that I just made. Hey, you got 60% of your money in bonds. Here's how much we're projecting you're going to spend, each of the next years until, say, Social Security kicks in. And then obviously the portfolio is going to have to do a lot less work at that point in time. So as long as we can kind of build this bridge until when this big income stream is going to come in, down the road, then, you don't really have to worry so much about any gyrations in between. And we have several clients where we've been doing a similar strategy for, it's not boilerplate, everything's customizable, but this is what made the most sense for John and Jane and what we've been executing for years. So when you look at what they were pulling out, so 2015, they pulled out more than 9% of their portfolio. It went up to as much as like 10 or maybe even 11% in a year. Even with the best laid plans, there's still some unforeseen expenses that may pop up from time to time. 1 or 2 years were higher than what we were planning. Another year was a little bit lower. But in aggregate, they were really pretty much in line with what we were expecting. So we had done a good job up front, kind of really understanding their lifestyle, modeling, what it was going to cost, and they did a good job kind of keeping with it. And even though things kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit in their life, as it does in all of our lives, they were really on track when you looked at it over a period of years. And when you hear like a 9%, 10% withdrawal rate, Walter, how does that strike you?
That sounds a little high.
Yeah. So, one of the retirement rules gone awry that we did was about the 4% withdrawal rate. And it's kind of simple. It's a good starting point to think about, what is sustainable amount that you can spend, kind of pull out 4% and increase it with inflation each year. But for most clients, and something we talked about in that prior episode, was it falls short. There's different ways you can go ahead and work into like a Social Security deferral strategy like we're talking about here. But for most of our clients, it doesn't really apply. For maybe a handful or two, it does. But in general, we just find that it falls short. So, they've been having this really twice the sustainable withdrawal rate for many, many years here, but they're still fine, and they're going to be fine. Their allocation changed. Again, they were about 50% stocks while they were working. As stock prices got higher, and some of the stress tests in their plan became more severe, because when you're starting to look at, say, okay, hey, I'm not going to be contributing any more to these accounts. I'm actually going to be using them to live on. And oh, by the way, I'm deferring Social Security. When you start stress testing somebody's financial plan, what you're going to find is, the higher risk portfolios in those stress tests are going to look pretty bad. And so it's not uncommon to see that there's this dynamic nature to the client's capacity for risk. They've done a good job saving around $900,000, but I mean, frankly, they have a pretty healthy lifestyle too. So while there's some safety margin in their plan, it's not like there was a ton of it. So we had to be pretty darn precise and really had to execute well in terms of their financial planning. And so in 2014, again, we kind of lowered their stock allocation, lowered their risk. And as the market continued to go higher, 2014, 2015 weren't necessarily great years in the stock market. But when we had tax relief in 2017, kind of gave another boost, and we had good returns, particularly in 17. 2019 was great, but as things kept going higher and got more expensive, we trimmed that stock allocation even further. So we got our target down to about 35%. So, again, if we think about kind of the dynamic nature here, retirement plan is always, it's always a continuous thing. It's that present participle that we talked about. And then the investing process is always dynamic as well. Inputs are always changing. And then you get into the income planning. Same thing there too. I mean, all this has to be kind of matched back, and if we need to, not only are expectations changing and our allocation changing in light of that in the retirement plan, but we may need to go ahead and change our spending. It could be a good adjustment. Maybe things worked out really well and you can afford to spend more, but it could be the other way too. So we got to keep our eye on all those balls. So John and Jane entered 2020 with, I'm just going to use round numbers, it was a little bit more, but around $600,000 in their account. They had 35% of that in stocks, or about $210,000, and roughly about 65% in bonds. So about just under $400,000 in bonds. So this year they're going to pull out about another $70,000, from their account. And so if all that they were going to do is just pull that from the bonds, they're still going to have more than $300,000 in bonds in their account at the end of 2020. John goes ahead and starts Social Security. $42,000 starts coming in from Social Security. Jane is actually going to get a little bit of a bump as well because her spousal benefit is going to be a little bit more than what she's currently receiving on her own. So collectively, they're only going to have to take out about $20,000 or $30,000 from their portfolio next year and for the foreseeable future. So let's just call it 30. So if they end, and I know I'm throwing out a lot of numbers here, and hopefully this is, Walter, you might have to provide some color or simplification or ask me if anything is unclear. But
well, I know all of our listeners listen to every podcast at least 3 or 4 times. So
yes,
it'll sink in by the 3rd or 4th time.
All right. So 600, let me just recap, 600,000 going into 2020. Only a little bit more than 200,000 of that in stocks and the rest in bonds. So they pull down roughly about 70,000 this year, a little bit more than that. Certainly stocks have sold off this year, so we're not selling stocks. Frankly, we're buying more of them than we did in March. But they end up the end of the year with somewhere around $300,000 in bonds. Social Security kicks in. They're getting about another $50,000 from there, and they need about $30,000 from the portfolio going forward. So if they do end the year at $300,000 in bonds, and they need $30,000 per year going forward, then 30 into 300 is 10 times. So basically, they have the next 10 years of spending in bonds. So whenever they look at their retirement plan, quite frankly, the results, the Monte Carlo results, don't look all that fantastic right now. The market just sold off. It was down, more than 30%, but it's bounced back a good bit here over the last couple of weeks. It certainly may go down some more. But when we actually look within their plan and look how we're actually going to manage their distribution plan, well, we're going to have this dynamic nature, and we're going to go ahead and use the bonds. And not only that, now that they've made that bridge to Social Security, and the Social Security benefits are going to be providing a majority of what they need for their spending, frankly, we may actually go ahead and increase our percentage in stocks. We may say, okay, hey, we made it through these really risky years. We made it through with flying colors, even though we had a 9, 10, 11% distribution rate for many of those years. Now that we've kind of got through those crunch years early in retirement, and Social Security is providing a lot more, and now our portfolio has to do a lot less of the work, frankly, we can be actually a little bit more aggressive with stocks. And oh, by the way, they just went down by 30%. So, rather than having, say, 10 years in bonds, maybe we go ahead and we reduce that to, say, 5 years in bonds that we'll leave in there. And we'll buy the rest in stocks and just go ahead and take a little bit more risk, but do it in a smart way. We're not really putting their lifestyle at risk. We're just being opportunistic in light of the new information that we have, in light of the changing expectations, in light of the dynamic nature of their planning, and as well as their investment allocation. So what does this mean for them? Well, it could mean a number of things, but first and foremost, if they have 5 years of additional spending in bonds, we've already took a big hit already this year. Most people are saying that this is going to be a time-bound thing, that, hey, once this vaccine is out there, then certainly we're going to be coming out of this. And probably sooner. Who knows how quickly life is going to get back to normal, but we don't know. But it does seem to be temporal. So, if you have 5 years, personally, I feel quite comfortable. We're going to have this conversation with them. If they don't feel comfortable and if they want to play it closer to the vest and just kind of stay where they're at and what's worked for them, that's completely fine. Certainly bonds have, generally speaking, done well, and forward looking, we can expect less for them. Stocks have gone down quite a bit. And so by and large, we can expect more from them. Vanguard just came out earlier in the week. They do a 10-year forecast for expected returns every year. And when you looked at that expectation last year, they said U.S. stocks would do somewhere around 4%. Well, they revised that expectation in light of what's happened recently, and they said, no, hey, in light of this, because stocks went on sale, now over the next 10 years, we think you can probably expect around 6.5 from U.S. stocks. So again, you don't know the path it's going to take in the short term. You need to have safe money. to go ahead and build that bridge, to go ahead and make sure that your lifestyle is protected. But we need to have a dynamic, we need to have an ongoing and continuous nature in what we're doing from a planning perspective, from an investing perspective, and from a retirement income generation perspective. And I was looking over this for John and Jane. I mean, we've been in the thick of it now for several weeks. Bad news all over the place. Certainly we've been incredibly busy. I'm getting, I use a time tracking app and I see how much screen time I'm putting on the computer. I'm like, oh, that's why I feel this way. And then, I'm preparing for our conversation this morning, Walter, and looking back over what we've done for John and Jane for the last 10 years. And I just couldn't be happier. I mean, it's worked out incredibly well for them. We had a plan. We executed the plan. All the stuff that we talked about, I mean, we've performed, and I think we've performed quite well. And even though things are bad out right now, John and Jane are fine. It's our job to remind them of all these things that we've done for them, all the smart decisions that they've made. We provided the advice, but they made the decisions. It's their plan. And we've gotten through this far, and they're out of the red zone. They're going to be fine. They can go ahead and continue to spend on down the bonds if they want, or we can be a little bit more opportunistic and actually take a little bit more stock risk now. But frankly, they don't have anything to worry about. And that and seeing all this come out in practice and not just theory, going through and having the experience and then having the wisdom to go ahead and not only design it, but then guide them through it and execute. I mean, just put a big smile on my face. And so it just kind of coming into the call today, not only was I excited to talk with you, Walter, but I was just really happy and excited to share the story with John and Jane and about the work that we've done for them. And most importantly, that they frankly don't even have to worry about anything. They're still going to be concerned. Health is a concern for everybody, particularly for the age group that most of our clients are in. But they can focus on what they can control. They can stay in the house. They can stay with their family. They can be healthy. But they don't have to worry about their money because they've did the proper planning and we executed. And frankly, now because we've done that, they have a lot more opportunity going forward.
It's funny to me that you are obviously very excited about, how things have turned out for them and where they stand and, how the plan, all the pieces came together pretty much perfectly to weather this storm, to keep them in a good position, all the things, right? But this isn't a unique story. I mean, you've done this for many, many, many people over the years. So it's neat to see that you still get enjoyment seeing the plan come together.
For me personally, I'm always my personality profile. It's like my number one strengths finder is achiever, and the executive summary on that is it doesn't matter what you did yesterday. You start fresh every day and have to prove your worth. And so for me, it's easy always to continue to look forward. But we've talked about this in a prior episode when we did the New Year's resolutions and just looking back. And I think particularly in times like this, on a number of different reasons, you have to look back. You have to be grateful for what we have. Being trapped in a house with our families certainly is not the worst thing in the world. I think we're pretty fortunate if that's the biggest worry that we have. And then looking back from a professional standpoint on, hey, this is what we thought made sense, and looking back and really being critical of our work and seeing it play out in practice has worked really well. So, hopefully this story has been helpful and illustrative of, what this dynamic nature of retirement planning, investment planning, and retirement income generation looks like and connects some of the dots. My goal is to share other stories that are like this, get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts on the retirement income generation, talk a little bit more about maybe somebody who's earlier in retirement or still working, and just show, hey, this isn't theory, this is practice, and this is how it needs to be executed, particularly through times like this when things are so challenging in the markets and things are changing so quickly. So that's what we're going to be getting into in the next few episodes. But the other thing I'll mention is, we did have a lot of people, we continue to have a lot of people just with questions reaching out to us. We do have 4 certified financial planners on staff. We do have capacity. A lot of my time is really dedicated to portfolios and to certain client work. But again, we have 4 CFPs on staff, and this is the time where people can make really big and bad mistakes and frankly cause themselves to have to work longer, maybe go back to work, spend less. None of those things are good. And none of this is a panacea. It's not a silver bullet, but we do have a prudent process that you can follow, and then we need to execute. If you're doing that blind, if you're flying blind, it's just not a good way to fly. But if you have questions, we're here to help. And I mean that sincerely. Yes, we're in business. We're in business to make a profit. But first and foremost, we're here to help. It has to be a win-win. And this is the time where people really, really need help. And so that's why we stepped up doing the podcast weekly. We're kind of having an all hands on deck approach, but we are here to help.
If you need that assistance, need that help, a couple of different ways that you can tap into it. You can call the team at True Wealth Design. The number is easy to remember, 855-TWD-PLAN. That's 855-893-7526. And online at truewealthdesign.com. Click on the Are We Right For You button to schedule a 15-minute call with an experienced advisor on the True Wealth team. Again, that's truewealthdesign.com, and click on the Are We Right For You button. And we'll put all the contact information in the show notes of today's episode, so feel free to go check that out, read it, learn about it, and go back and listen to some of the old episodes that we talked about at the beginning of the show today for more background on proper planning techniques, making sure that you're viewing your financial and retirement planning in the proper light. So much great content on this show, so do invite you to go back and listen to some of the older episodes. Although the world has certainly changed around us, Kevin, a lot of the things that we've talked about on previous episodes continue to apply today and will continue to apply in the future as well. Some basics, some solid planning techniques and thought processes that won't change just because we've had a market downturn and are in the middle of this crisis. So go stand by that great advice and tap into it today. Just go check out all the previous episodes and listen to your heart's content. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and many other of the several other popular apps that are out there. In fact, if you see us not on a particular app, let us know, and we'll get the show on there for you. Kevin, thanks for the help this week. Always enjoyed the conversation with you. The show and tell went well. Thanks for showing us how the planning all comes together, and we'll talk again next week.
Thanks, Walter.
All right, we appreciate it. That's Kevin Kroskey. I'm Walter Storholt. Thanks for joining us. We'll look forward to talking to you next time right back here on Retire Smarter.
Information provided is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment, tax, or legal advice. Information is obtained from sources that are deemed to be reliable, but their accurateness and completeness cannot be guaranteed. All performance reference is historical and not an indication of future results. Benchmark indices are hypothetical and do not include any investment fees.